Microphone check. Alright, microphone check. Okay. Today we're going to talk about tearouts. And with this kind of intermediate level tearout talk. Once again with the cats. Okay. So today we're going to talk about tearouts. Oh man, if I say one more fucking time. Hello there, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about tearouts. We're going to be talking about tearouts on a sort of intermediate level, as you kind of get into wood carving a little bit more. Tearouts happen in early wood carving. There are kind of these three mechanical reasons why they can happen, and that's you have the wrong kind of wood, you have the wrong kind of knife, or the knife is not properly sharpened, or there's maybe a technique issue, like a very basic one, like the knife is pointed in the wrong direction while you're trying to carve. After you get all of the mechanical things down, you have properly sharpened tool, you have basswood, say, or whatever kind of a wood that's carvable, and it's a good piece of wood, all this other stuff. You still have tearouts that you're going to come across at a certain detail, size, or again, when it's basswood, because basswood is amazing. It's one of the most popular woods for carving for a reason, but you kind of don't understand that until you carve a bunch of other woods, and the other ones take detail so much better, but the thing is they're just so much harder, and they're harder to work with. So it's basically basswood. It really has like the most tear out ability as far as a carvable wood, but it's worth it because of how easy it is to work with, and again, the color. There's all these other reasons, but the point is, when you're carving stuff, like especially the videos that I do and everything, when you're doing these faces, you get into these sizes where you're doing like eyes at this size, that the wood really can't handle a lot of the eyes that we're going to be attempting. So again, I have a video on doing eyes, and there's a more simple approach, but the point is that you get tearouts even when your tools are sharp, and you don't blame yourself. So I'm going to give you a few little different ways to deal with the tearouts to make you maybe try to make it better, and then I'm going to start getting a little bit more into some rambling about why tearouts happen a little bit more, and some more sophisticated ways to try to get around it. The basic kind of three ways you can deal with it is, first of all, is you can do the rubbing alcohol. You've maybe heard this before. I'll bring it up again specifically because it took me a while to try it out. I don't know what my deal was. I just kind of poo-pooed it. I didn't think it'd be that incredible or anything. And you do basically a 50-50 mix of rubbing alcohol and water, and it's best to do it in a little spray bottle, and just a little like travel size one. It's like an ounce or whatever. And you want to keep it fresh because the alcohol dissipates? No, it evaporates. The alcohol evaporates, and so you basically need alcohol to be in there. And I've actually seen people that they mark on their thing, kind of like the way I'm sure when you went into your parents' liquor cabinet, they would start to mark their liquor to see if you drank any. Anyway, the point is, you just don't want to use a bunch of water, soak your piece in water. You want to have the alcohol. The alcohol thins out the water, and it also gets out of there quicker. Let's not get into why that works, but using a little bit of alcohol and water, you soak that into the wood a little bit, and it really does work well. There's kind of there's a balance of how much you want to soak the wood, and also how you don't want to use too little. Basically, you want to spray it, and you want it to soak in enough so that it's as deep as the cut you're gonna make. I mean, if it's soaked in and you make a little V cut, and you can see at the bottom that it's dry, and that's where your tearouts are happening, then obviously it's not helping enough. So you need to soak it a little better, or you need to use more shallow cuts and go as you can. It is a little bit tricky because this stuff it goes so quickly, it evaporates so quickly, and really, again, it's kind of wherever you're having tear out problems at that time. If it's on the wings of the tool or if it's at the bottom, that's where you want it to be a little bit darker from the liquid, when you're carving it. You don't want to get it too soaked as well. That's why you use the spray bottle, because eventually the wood's going to get just soggy, and then it's just going to be like mushy and tearing out in a different kind of way. So I definitely suggest trying that, though. Just get a little spray bottle, cheap one. You can do a little half and half. It doesn't have to be perfect on the half and half. And just try that out, and you'll notice that it really does allow a little percentage of extra amount of detail, and it can make a huge difference on projects. It's not just basswood; it can go onto any kind of wood that you're having issues with. It also kind of gets into why fresh wood, green wood, carves so much better. It still has some life in it, and this kind of simulates that a little bit. So anyway, I'll get off of that. That's kind of one of the ways that can help you in some tough spots, but it doesn't really do everything necessarily. So why the tear out is happening is because basically there's when you make a cut, there's a little bit of pushing before the cutting happens and while the cutting is happening. No matter how sharp your tool is, no matter how soft the wood is, there's a small fraction of cutting or pushing while the cutting's happening. And basically there's different amounts of pushing depending on the tools. If you have, where is my regular knife, by the way? Well, pretend like I have a knife with me. Let me just grab it. Let's say, for example, you have your regular knife. When you're carving with that, it's got you can carve a tiny little bit, right? Just these tiny little fraction of a thing. And as soon as you get into a gouge or a V-tool, it's going to be cutting a lot more wood. It's going to be cutting, you're going to use one of these. Even if you don't sink it in all the way, it's going to be, maybe a quarter of an inch of wood that you're carving, as opposed to what we just did here, where you can very easily just do a fraction of a millimeter. Now, how much wood you're cutting at once is going to up that ratio of the pushing to cutting. And the more pushing there is, then the more likely a tear out's going to happen. It also makes it easier to cut, when there's less pushing, but the tear outs are what we're talking about right now. So besides the amount of that, and you can control that, say, with a V-tool, and this is one of the ways you can get around it if you're trying to make V-cuts, is that you don't go as deep as maybe you normally would. You do a very light, very shallow as you can get it to cut. And you'll probably notice it doesn't tear out as easily as when you do that super deep cut. You just don't go for the gusto. So there's kind of this part of that is because it's less amount of tool that's cutting. And I guess a good way to think about that is when you've seen people do this, where a guy lays on a bed of nails. That's basically the distribution of force is such that the nails don't cut through the guy. They don't puncture the man's skin. But if you were to take away the distribution, how many nails there were, they would go through the guy. And it's not even really a metaphor. This is exactly what's happening with your tools and with the wood. And basically, in this situation, though, we can keep applying pressure. And instead of it, not puncturing, it'll basically tear it, is what'll happen, and let's get away from talking about mutilating people. But basically that's what's going on with some of these. So there's the other issue of getting a little bit deeper into this, is that when you get into these tools that are curved, that the wood that's ejected, that's cut out, is compressed, and it's basically it's kind of like a displacement thing. Like when you put something in water, it displaces the water and the water raises. When you put one of these tools, any tool, into wood, when you do a carving, right, it's going from a smaller size, which is still displacement, and then it gets wider. Now, no matter how thin your tool is, it's creating a push that's not just towards your cut, but it's also pushing outwards as the tool becomes more and more thick. Now that issue, it happens that the wood will go out this way because there's all this wood underneath here, and again, it's a whole pushing battle. So when you get to some, that's more and more curved, and especially with a V-tool, that wood that's getting ejected isn't it's basically getting pushed towards itself. It's getting compressed in the center of this little tool here. And that adds up to the pressure, again, that's going against, it's adding up to all this pushing ratio that is not cutting. So, and when you push it and there's not enough cut force with the push, then it's going to be doing the tearing out. So that just happens again. So that the point of that part is the best way to deal with, if you can't get a V-tool to cut something that's tearing out and you need it to be done, you go to a regular knife. Okay, if you can't do a more shallow one, it's still not working, you go to a regular knife, because there's so much less pressure that's being put on the wood for you to win that cutting ratio versus pushing ratio. And you can basically do all the cuts a V-tool can with a knife. It's just 2 cuts instead of doing the one. And they're never going to look quite the same, because this is it is a tool on its own. It has a kind of different shape, and it's always going to be a very specific angle. And no matter how careful you are, you're just not going to be able to get that same kind of look. But you can get close. And again, when you're working on an eye, this is where this is mostly happens, is that when you're working on these eyes, and it's this tiny little part on this basswood, and you have to do this little tiny cross cut, it's going to tear out. And so if you can't get it, even with a shallow cut, then you go to your knife and you make those cuts, and it's going to happen a lot easier. Now, it is harder harder to carve it out with a knife as far as carving wise, but as far as tear outs, it'll be easier. So get used to that somewhat, try that out. And again, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's an order you can do where you can kind of do some cuts with the V-tool and then some with the knife, where the shape isn't as important. So those are the main 3 things, okay? Basically, you have the alcohol that you can try, and then you have going to a more shallow cut, using not as much of the tool, and then there's also just going to a straight edge tool where there's not as much pressure being put on the wood. And then I guess there's kind of a final thing, which is not really, I don't know, it's kind of an anti-problem fixing, which is you basically do a finish like the ones you maybe will see me do on some of my videos. And I have a video that's specifically on my finishing process that I do sometimes, where I do a darkening of the wood, which is called glazing or antiquing. And basically you're putting a layer of matte, polyurethane, which doesn't really stay on top of the wood, but it seals it somewhat. And you put a gel stain on top of that, and then you wipe it off without wiping the crevices. So that gel stain will stay in those crevices, and that's where those tear outs are going to be. So basically that gel stain covers up all of those little tear outs. And if you don't want that, necessarily, it's something just to think about if you need to cover stuff up. But it leads me also into, when you're working on a piece, you're going to be seeing all the problems, all the defects. And besides you seeing those, it's going to lead you to keep working on areas to a point where you make the problem worse and worse and worse. And everybody's done this when they work on eyes. They've ended up digging out a huge hole where the eye is supposed to be, because they keep trying to do the same thing over and over again. And so some of that's, being just comfortable with your own work. Some of it's, maybe trying a different technique. But, I'd suggest looking at other people's work when you can. And everybody covers it up. I do it myself. I don't want to show, pieces that have tear outs in them and whatnot. So, but you'll see, when you start looking at it, you look at Woodcarving Illustrated, the magazine, people's books, when you look at it closely, there's little tear outs there. And you say, oh, look, everybody else has tear outs too. And the point is, you don't notice it until you're a carver yourself and you start looking for these things. So don't judge yourself too harshly. If you're having problems in an area, go back to it later when you have kind of a fresh look at things, and reevaluate. Either it's okay by itself, or you do a new design, which is kind of another roundabout technique of dealing with the tear outs, is that you know, instead of trying all these things where it decreases the tear outs, is that you very specifically change the design. You know, if you're at a certain size, like say the eye, and the wood's not going to hold the kind of design that you want, the little tiny details, then don't do that. You need to make the design more simple. You need to maybe make them larger so that the cuts aren't as close together. I'll go over this in a little bit. Again, I would suggest, if you haven't already, check out my eye video, because I go over a very simple eye, something that I kind of came up with for faces that are this size, that are basically just a squint that you can get away with, and they look totally fine. You know, you guys probably will see my work and never notice it. And basically, we know too much anatomy. You know, even people that haven't been trained in art, they know too much anatomy about the eye, and they're trying to carve that in there, and it's not going to hold the detail. So you kind of have to go with a more stylized, simple version of the eye, and that'll work. If you look at this guy right here, right, he doesn't even have eyes in him at all, and I could probably leave him like that, and he'd be fine. So you can think about it on that level too, that you kind of have to figure out ways around it. Because keep attacking these issues, you know, these problems, digging out these gouges where the eye should be, these holes, that's going to frustrate you. It's going to go counter to your, you know, wood carving career. You're going to, blame yourself. You're going to get frustrated. Come back to it later, you know, just deal with the simple design. And then when you get better with carving, you may have some better techniques or ability to design, or you're just more okay with some of these tear outs, and you'll be able to deal with it better. So be easy with yourself on this stuff. So I'm going to go into a little bit of drawing to talk about a little bit more on what can happen with multiple V-tool cuts that get close to each other and why those tear outs happen, right? So whoops, record and action. Okay, so basically, when you're doing all these cuts next to each other, right, we'll do them on the back here. They're all like, from a profile, they're all like this, okay? These are all your little V-cut pathways. These are going to be your peaks, these are going to be your valleys. And this is like, you know, for beards, or if, you know, you're doing an eye. Like, again, we did this sort of, where did I put my bing dang V-tool? Again, like we did on this side, all your eye is a cut there, and then it's cut across the bottom. And then maybe you do one for the eyelid, you know, eyelid on the top. It's V cuts right next to each other. So again, it's this, from the profile, it's basically just doing this. Now, when you do these, they may work on certain, you know, areas better than others. Like, you know, this is with the grain, so we can do these pretty close to each other with the grain pretty much all day long and not have problems. But once we start making them have, you know, waves in them, or with it when if it's an eye and we go against it, we start having more and more problems. You can see this one. I need to figure out some sort of, you can't really see it, but this one you can see. If you look at this one, it doesn't look very good. It's got some tear outs in it. So, you know, which direction it's going plays a part, but basically it's because of these peaks that are all right next to each other that make it weak. And when you have this is basically only being held by some little tiny things, and it's very fragile, so this is prone to break off. So what we were talking about earlier, where there's this kind of this pressure that's not just with the not just in this direction pushing on the fibers, but it's also outwards, because the tool is doing a displacement. It's widening as it's inside the wood, and it's pushing the wood outwards. So if we have our wood here, this is the profile, we make one cut, you know, we just go through, then everything should be fine, because the wood is mildly will bend a little bit. It'll compress, and it will be backed up by all this wood on each side, and it'll be fine. However, if we make another cut right here, On this side, everything's going to be fine, but on this side, because there's no wood here, this isn't going to compress and go over there. It's just going to probably break off. This little piece is all just going to break off. And so that's why when you do some of these like side cuts like this, or you'll be doing a beard, you'll see it start to get messy, is because basically that's basically what's happening, is that there's nothing to back it up. And if you did an eye, or say, you know, you opened it up, I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, but you could do kind of the bottom and the top, and this is kind of your eyeball, and you're like, oh, I'll just do a cut through the middle. Then when that tool goes in there, it's going to be pressing outwards on both sides, and it's probably going to break both of these off. And that's when you're going to have this really cruddy looking eyeball. And that's when you're going to go in again and try to do all these cuts again, and you're going to end up with this huge hole where the eye used to be, which we've all done if we've done faces at all. So it's not just that. It's not just these breaking off. When you're doing beards and stuff, and you're doing all these curves of these, you know, V-tool lines that are all right next to each other, it also affects like just how what we were talking about earlier of the forward push as well. And I'm not going to get into kind of the physics of that and explain that, but it does also affect that part of it. So basically, what I want to get at here is that the order in which you do things can change, you know, how well things hold up. Basically, like what I just showed you here, you do this one last, it's not going to work out. But like if you do your middle cut first for the eyeball, and then for these, you maybe do them with your knife, like we were talking about going with that, because it doesn't create as much pressure. You know, just do like a little bit of a cut. Or again, like changing the design, don't do it right there so there's such a weak little point. Do the cut over a tiny bit, and so that there's not like this tiny fragile little piece that's going to tear off and look cruddy. So okay, after this, there's this whole side of when you do these cuts, right? We were talking about you can make them more shallow. Like if you wanted to V-cut this size, you can start out really shallow, and then you can go in and do slightly larger and slightly larger. And even just that will be better, because it's just the whole pressure situation and how much wood has to remove. Each time there's less and less wood on the inside, which means it will give away more freely, and it won't push on the outside wood as much. And so if there's a situation where there's no wood over here, you really don't want that pressure over here. You want as little pressure as possible. So the thinner a slice you take off in this little middle piece, the less pressure it's going to put on over there. And it's also, all of these factors kind of come together. We talked about when you make a cut that's a V, and there's this displacement, it's the wood that's coming out is being compressed together in the center. Can you see what I'm doing? Yeah. It's getting compressed in the center of this. If you think about this as a wave, both of the excess wood that's coming off, it's getting pushed together right there. And so again, the less wood that comes off to get compressed, the less compression there is. And then again, this whole equation comes down more and more. So we're going to go a little bit deeper. Hopefully earlier in this I kind of got you guys a few different, you know, simple things that can help you. You try the alcohol and water, you try doing more shallow cuts, and you try to go to your straight tool whenever you can. And again, also changing the design to a more simple thing. Okay, we're going to go a step further. When you're doing the V-tool, if you're going the grain, let's say, with most cuts like this, I'm sorry, we don't really have a clean side here. We'll pretend like it's right here. The grain's going like this. Ugh. This is a mess. The grain's going this way, right, with the cut of the wood. So when you're cutting like this, it's fine, right? Everything should be okay. As soon as you start to diagonal a little bit this way, you're going to be cutting against the grain on one of these wings, right? Imagine it for a second here. The grain's going this way. This side of the wing is going to be going, you know, with the grain. It's going to be fine. But this one's going to be going against the grain. It's going to be tearing up against it. because it's going this way. On this side, it's going to be a bunch of hangnails to get pushed out that way. The whole point of the grain cutting is after the cut's made. Well, it's more easy to explain after the cut's made. If you're cutting along this way, these are all just going to pretty much lay down like that. Whereas, whoops, too close. See, a cut this way would be fine, but if you cut this way, there's nothing behind these. So it's going to catch these and it's going to curl it over like that. That's going to curl over like that. That's going to curl over like that. So, and that's why cutting against the grain causes problems. So it's interesting that, you know, with a V-tool, pretty much on all your cuts, one side is going against the grain. It's one of the reasons why it causes problems. So it'll do a lot of cuts okay, especially if it's sharp, and you won't notice it. But once you start stacking up these different variables that add pressure, like there's a bunch of, you know, cuts together, and the more they're going against the grain, you start to see more and more problems. If you ever have done a curvy beard, or a beard that, you know, slowly is starting to go more and more against the grain, you'll see that it starts to have more and more problems. So the way you can get around this is that you basically do your very shallow cut, and we'll say that this is against the grain at the moment, but I mean, I'm sorry, if we're going like this direction, I need a new piece of wood, goddamn. Hold on a second, let me go grab one. Okay. So the grain's going this way. So say the cut's this way, right? And on this cut, on this side of the wing, everything was good, but on the other side, it's going against it. This is a shallow one, so we're okay. But if it's causing problems, what you have to do is you do the shallow one. Let's say when we want it deeper, you have to tilt it this way so that this wing isn't cutting that much. And then you get that soft cut with the grain over there, okay? And then you turn it around, and for over here, now this side's going with the grain, and we tilt it so that this side isn't going against the grain, and we can get that clean cut, okay? This is really complicated, like as far as, you understand the idea maybe, but when you're carving, it's really, like, you can't just model all this stuff in your mind all the time. Especially once the shapes, you're making a face or something, they start getting really confusing and as far as what's with the grain and what's not. Once you start having a sphere and all these things. But you come back to this stuff when you're starting to have problems, when you're starting to have some tear-outs, back out, start to think about it, and just think about, which way, is this one cutting with the grain and that one is not. We tend to think with the tools, like with a gouge or something, that the direction of the tool is what with the grain means. But it's really, when you have a double-sided piece, one's going to be going with it, one's going to be going against it, and so that's going to be causing more and more problems. So, lastly, if you're going completely against the grain, and this is again what you're going to be doing with the eyes, I have a very sharp tool here, and this is holding up. But once it starts not doing that, actually I'll show you here. Can you guys even see this? See if I can get one right next to it that would start to cause problems. You guys can't see that, I'm sorry. Okay, but you guys know how this goes. When you start doing these small against the grain with the V-tools, again, that's when you go in there and say, okay, before I dig out a huge trench, I'm just gonna clean up this line with a straight tool. Clean up this line with a straight tool. Because with the knife, it's not really going as against the grain as one of these are. These are pushing, that thing's going straight against it. Whereas this, when it's tilted, it's actually kind of cheating the cut to make the wood kind of, and the physics of it, so that it's actually going a diagonal, that's actually going down with the grain, as opposed to pushing across it. I'm not sure if that really makes sense. Anyway, I hope some of this stuff helps a little bit, guys. If you have any questions or anything, you know, feel free to contact me. And if any of you guys stuck with me throughout this, congratulations.